and welcome to the Herald Gaming channel. Today, thanks to the kindness and generosity of my Patreons, I am diving into the world of Cyberpunk, giving you an overview of its violent history and what the storyline of Cyberpunk 2077 is shaping up to be. The history of Mike Pondsmith's Cyberpunk universe is written in the blood of the masses. Disease, plague, greed, unintended consequences, and corporate tyranny punctuate the fall of internationalism as the global markets crashed, with the working and middle classes being financially wiped out across the planet. In the US, in the face of popular uprisings, martial law was enacted, and with it the betrayal and abandonment of the Constitution had begun. In the midst of this turmoil, the corporations stepped forward. The global market and its money were in freefall, and as the US government sought to stabilize and shore up its power base, it had little choice but to lean on the vast resources of private industry, at least the ones that had themselves survived the crash. The already incestuous relationship between corporate power and the Washington elites reached new lows. Whilst world governments and corporations spiraled out of control, technology marched on. Now, unchecked by regulation and restriction. Augmentations designed for military use, robotic arms, legs, neural enhancers, and the like found their way on to the domestic market. The transhumanist revolution had begun. But instead of elevating humanity out of its social decay, it deepened divides, causing a culture shock, or rather techno-shock, that was so extreme it accelerated the socio-economic collapse. Mass psychosis allowing megacorporations to create a almost neo-feudal social order. The sickening slide to oligarchy, which had begun back in the 1960s, was complete. So entrenched in their power, corporate rivalries historically played out in the courtroom or in smoke-filled boardrooms morphed into actual armed conflict. Between 2004 and 2025, there were 4 corporate wars, with the second and fourth being the most disastrous and far-reaching. The Pacific Ring was left all but uninhabitable by the Second Corporate War between Solve Oil and Petrochem, both fossil fuel giants and the primary producers of Chew-2, the alcohol-based fuel which eclipsed oil as the main source of domestic and industrial chemical energy production. But it is likely to be the events and aftermath of the Fourth Corporate War that will shape the narrative landscape of cyberpunk going into the future. The conflict ignition point was a tug-of-war over the defunct company IHAG between the US Oceanic Technology and Energy Corporation OTEC and the European Corporation Internationale Nauticale et Oceanique Sino. As the legal battles between these two giants raged, both corporations readied themselves for the inevitable armed conflict. OTEC contracted the US megacorporation Militech International Armaments, a company specializing in weapons manufacture and private military contracting, as their primary proxy on the battlefield, whilst Sino engaged the Arasaka Corporation, a Japanese megacorporation dealing in corporate security, banking and manufacturing, who also happened to hold a bloody and storied rivalry with Militech. War in the cyberpunk universe often started in the net, and this one was no different. Combat netrunners were sent after stock holdings. Netwatch, the police specialists working in the digital landscape, tried to quell the conflict, but to no end. Eurobank, or perhaps more specifically the financial kingmakers, the international bankers, stepped in, pressuring for peace between OTEC and Sino. But by the time terms were reached, the conflict had devolved from OTEC versus Sino to Militech versus Arasaka, and neither side were willing to blink. The shadow portion of the Fourth War had begun. Now, there are many types of arms race. The traditional hardware type, which ranges from competing for air superiority all the way to the insanity of mutually assured destruction. Less familiar and perhaps far more insidious is the digital arms race. In our world, we have malware, ransomware, disinformation, bots and farms, covert and not so covert surveillance to contend with, to name but a few. In the Cyberpunk universe, Militech and Arasaka were, and likely still are in the narrative going forward, engaged in this digital arms race. But the stakes were far higher. Imagine a program that could make a digital copy of a mind. A copy you could use to blackmail the victim, steal corporate secrets without the hassle of kidnapping your target. It could be used for outright murder too, kill the top research scientist at a rival company whilst stealing all their secrets. The program I'm describing is called Soulkiller, written by the brilliant netrunner Cunningham. The more murderous aspects of Soulkiller were later added by the Arasaka Corporation after they had kidnapped, tortured, blackmailed, and ultimately murdered Cunningham, ironically using the very program she had created. Became a digital construct persona, a ghost in the system, an engram. Arasaka would go on to use Soulkiller to wreak havoc on their rivals, Militech. Alt's ghost, her engram, would escape her digital prison of Arasaka, only to be recaptured again. Now, Alt's story is more complex and interesting than the one I'm telling you right now. Please bear in mind that this is the TLDR version of Cunningham's story. I will show the character proper love and make a dedicated video for her in the future. On with the story. Now, the first weapons of the Shadow War deployed were the End Runners, Cyberpunk's version of cyborgs, basically a human brain encased in, well, whatever the hell they wanted/needed to get the job done, mostly humanoid robotics. Now, it was all Black Ops, covert and deadly, but the conflict soon spun out of control. Militech contracting Rach Bartmos, the best netrunner arguably in the world at that time, tasking him with the destruction of Soulkiller. But by the time Bartmos had located the mainframe holding the killer code, he had already decimated Arasaka's space factories using their own SAT-killer orbital satellites to do the job, after which Arasaka assassinated Bartmos, or his body at least, and the hot phase of the Fourth War began. But not before Bartmos's parting gift to the world, a net virus that destroyed anything digital it came into contact with. Make no mistake, it was a net killer, and it spread like wildfire across the globe. That said, the real-world destruction was just as spectacular. Hong Kong and Rio de Janeiro were reduced to rubble, and the orbital space colony O'Neill 2 declared independence after a near miss on the Crystal Palace colony caused by the chaos of the conflict. Who armed O'Neill to assure their independence? That's a question for another day. Now, the reckless and wanton destruction reaped by these two warring factions could go unchecked no longer. The civilian governments of LA, Texas, and Japan seized the holdings and assets of both Militech and Arasaka, nationalizing them. In the end, Militech aligned with what remained of the US governments to basically save itself. Arasaka had well and truly lost the war, and what remained of its forces and command structure retreated to Night City. Martial law had been declared there during the conflict, but Night City was still very much under the thumb of the Arasaka Corporation. Pinned down and surrounded by Militech and US troops, the defiant corporation was still in possession of Soulkiller. Arasaka's Night City compound and its tower were a veritable fortress, and they were not going down without a fight. 2 teams were sent into the tower by Militech, their mission to copy the air-gapped database of the corporation, a treasure trove of compromat that could topple governments, shatter alliances, and change the world of 2024. Once they had copied the database, the beta team was to nuke The building, the subterranean depths where the servers were housed, were shielded, limiting the most destructive aspects of the baby nuke whilst bringing down the Arasaka Tower. The Alpha team was sent to destroy Soulkiller and rescue Alt Cunningham. Arasaka had killed her body, but her mind was imprisoned in their Soulkeeper research lab on the 120th floor. Once Alpha team had completed their mission, they were to firebomb the lab and haul ass. In Cyberpunk 2020, this was the final Arasaka mission. The Alpha team were made up of NPCs, specifically Rogue, Shaitan, Spider Morphy, Thompson, and Johnny Silverhand. Now, Rogue was a solo, a meat shield and killer for hire, partnered with Shaitan. Rogue was also a former lover of Johnny Silverhand. Shaitan was an edge runner, a cyborg and freelance black ops specialist. Cyber Morphy was a netrunner with a deep hatred of Arasaka. Thompson was a top reporter/war correspondent with a world news service. And last, but by no means least, Johnny Silverhand was a rockaboy activist and living legend, lead singer of the band Samurai, and the grieving fiancé of Alt Cunningham. He was there to set free the ghost engram of his fallen love, or die trying. For an in-depth look at Johnny Silverhand, do check out my video on him, links above. Now, I have referred to all these people in the past tense because the events we are covering here happened in 2024, some 50 years prior to 2077. Now, they could all be dead in the traditional sense of the word, and yet, because of programs like Soulkiller, they could be alive, at least in some semblance. The other notable characters on this mission were Morgan Blackhand, a legendary solo with a strict code of ethics, well, at least for a killer for hire, and Adam Smasher, an Arasaka edge-running psychopathic gun for hire, as well as cyborg supremacist who also harbored an intense rivalry with Morgan Blackhand. Saburo Arasaka, the 101-year-old CEO of the Arasaka Corporation, while his two sons feature in this episode. Kei being the dutiful eldest son and carbon copy of the merciless Saburo, and Yorinobu, the rebellious 20-something rockaboy bent on his father's destruction. In this scenario, the beta team would be made up of player characters. Now, in terms of pen and paper roleplay, this is a set piece, meaning that some aspects of the story the role players have control over, but there is a defined story structure, and in this case, a defined outcome. The culmination of events and unanswered questions resulting from this dual mission will likely have an impact on the narrative of Cyberpunk going forward, both in 2077 and Red, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let's break down the key plot points that transpired. The player team are successful. I'll say eventually, depending on how mean your dungeon master is to you. Mine can be quite mean. And you find yourselves deep in the bowels of the Arasaka Tower. The mission was to copy the Compromat gold mine database, but on inspection of the system, you find the engram of Yorinobu Arasaka, whose mind has been copied by Soulkiller. Yorinobu is himself a highly valuable asset with deep knowledge of his father's insidious global cabal and its inner workings. He was also the founder and leader of the Steel Dragons biker gang, a group of battle-hardened nomads with one purpose: the destruction of the Arasaka Corporation. The conundrum: do you save Yorinobu or the Compromat? Because you can't save both. But this is a set piece, and whatever the role player's actions, the Compromat database is lost. Now to the Alpha team, who again largely succeed at the first part of their mission. Silverhand and the gang make it all the way to the 120th floor. They destroy the Soulkiller and download Alt Cunningham's persona into a data storage unit, but as this is all happening, Kei Arasaka, seeing the tower is under attack, tries to transmit a copy of Soulkiller to a remote server, forcing Militech, or more specifically the operational commander of the two strike missions, Morgan Blackhand, to call airstrike on the tower to destroy their uplink. Morgan had shown his hand, and knowing that Soulkiller was the intended target of this assault, Kei was able to send forces to those specific locations in the tower. Now, this is where shit went sideways very badly for the Alpha team. Adam Smasher arrives at the Soulkiller lab with a security squad, blocking the Alpha team's escape. Spider Morphy, determined to save Alt Cunningham, uploads her engram onto the open net. I mean, it was risky, with Bartmus's virus running wild, but it was the best chance she had. If Spider made it out alive, she would try to retrieve Alt's ghost then. Now, seeing that their survival odds were tumbling, Johnny Silverhand leaps from cover, giving Shaitan the chance to tackle Adam Smasher. With the help of Shaitan, Johnny gives his teammates the opening they need to escape, but at the cost of his life. Sadly, the grievously injured Shaitan failed to subdue Adam Smasher, and the Edgerunner was soon hot on the heels of Rogue, Spider, and Thompson. Got some bad news, peeps. Thompson didn't make it, and none of them would if not for the timely arrival of Morgan Blackhand. Not a single soul would have walked out of the Arasaka Tower alive. How, you may ask? Well, sanity, being a fleeting and transient concept for Mr. Adam Smasher, fled at the sight of his arch-rival, Blackhand. Off mission, off script, and I'm presuming terminally off his meds, Smasher and Blackhand beat the living shit out of one another, ending up on the rooftop, still brawling, as the baby nuke detonated and the tower toppled. Now, Kei Arasaka thought he'd made his mistake, but was eventually captured by Spider Morphy and suffered the same fate as his half-brother Yorinobu. To our knowledge, Kei would be the last victim of Soulkiller, Spider Morphy destroying the last copy after Kei's physical death. Kei's engram would be stored in the digital prison Raish Batmuth had created for his father, Saburo. So have CD Projekt Red shown their hand, narratively speaking, by showcasing Johnny Silverhand at E3 in 2019? I'm not sure. If you want to know where the storyline of Alt and Silverhand led following the events of the Arasaka Mission, check out Cyberpunk 2030X or Altered Carbon, the 2018 Netflix sci-fi hit based on the 2002 book of the same name. Good artists copy and great artists steal, and well, who can blame them? Personally, I'm going to leave Cyberpunk 2030X for you to discover on your own, because Mike Pondsmith himself said that the content of 2030X is no longer canon, but we are likely to see elements of that storyline in Cyberpunk Red. Cyberpunk Red being the new Mike Pondsmith pen and paper role-playing game due to be published around the same time as Cyberpunk 2077 releases. We're going to have all the cyberpunk we want for quite some time. Now, in interviews, Mike Pondsmith explained that Red would bridge the gap between Cyberpunk 2020 and Cyberpunk 2077. So, what does all this mean for the story going ahead into the game? It's time for a little bit of speculation. First things first, I think we have not heard the last of the Arasaka clan. Be it the elder Saburo, his ghost son, or simply the clan itself, revenge must be exacted on Militech and those who helped bring the company and its leaders low. Honor requires it. We know that Johnny Silverhand will be at our side through much of the game, but I think it would not be out of the question for Alt Cunningham and even Raish Batmuth to feature as pivotal characters going forward. I think it's likely we will see the resurgence or rediscovery of Soulkiller or some evolution of it. Will CD Projekt Red be able to resist the temptation of bringing back Adam Smasher and Morgan Blackhand into the story? Because let's face it, there are a wealth of narrative threads to pull here, and honestly, I think the answer to all these will, won't they, is hell yes. But here's the kicker: whether we will find our answers to the story questions in 2077 or Red, I think that's the real question. Now, I know that CD Projekt Red will want to honour the original source material, showing deference to the old world, but if The Witcher is anything to go by, they are not afraid to take a wonderful idea and make it spectacular whilst still fitting it into the delicate dance of narrative gameplay, which is vastly different from any other form of storytelling, and I think arguably much harder. Now, I hope you enjoyed my broad brush overview of the world of Cyberpunk, and do let me know what you are hoping to see in the narrative of Cyberpunk 2077 in the comments. And whilst you're down there, please do like this video if indeed you did like it. Share it if the love moves you. Subscribe and ring that bell so you do not miss any of my Wednesday lore videos. And please do show some love to Cody, Kildare, Cub, Jolly Joestar, Jason Venter, Molini, Dark Griever, and all my wondrous, fantabulous Patreons, without whom I would be unable to dedicate the time and resources I do to my content creation. I can never thank you all enough. If you would like to join my band of nerdy awesomeness, there are links below. Now, I hope you will come back and check out my Monday show, Naughty Clicker News, or my Friday Top 10 series. But until we meet again, as always, thank you so much for watching.